Hey guys, these notes are for factoring when a is 1. Our essential question is how can I rewrite a trinomial into the product of two binomial factors? So this set of notes is a little bit more intense compared to the last few sets of notes that we've had just because of how much we have to do, and really it's only one extra thing, but that one extra thing is kind of time consuming. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. Again, if you have any questions during this video, just make a note of it and please ask me before or after school during tutorials. So let's look at our essential question. I know I usually don't really focus on it, but we're going to focus on it a little bit today. So how can I rewrite a trinomial? So a trinomial is what? That's something that's 3 terms, okay? We want to rewrite a trinomial into the product of two binomial factors. Well, binomial means 2 terms, so I need 2 things that are 2 terms. So, and essentially I'll have 4 terms altogether. Now, what does product mean? Well, product is an answer to a multiplication problem, so this means like the multiplication. Okay, so when we're talking about 2 binomials, let's say x plus 6 and x plus 3, those are 2 binomials, and I want the product of that. So I'd have to multiply them and get a trinomial. So we want to actually go backwards. So since day 1, we've been double distributing and then going to get to that one trinomial, and now we're basically going backwards. Okay? We'll talk more about that later on into the notes. Now, first vocabulary word is standard form of a quadratic. This is brand new. We have not talked about this. So the standard form of a quadratic is an ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? So a, b, and c are just numbers. So they can be 7, 3, 5, 2, 4. So for example, if I have like 3x squared minus 2x plus 5, my a is 3, my b is negative 2, and my c is positive 5. Okay, so those are, that's the standard form of a quadratic. In factors, okay, this is 2 terms that multiply together to create a new expression. So this whole unit so far has been about factoring. When we're factoring, we're basically multiplying things out, dividing things out, but those things that we're dividing out can be multiplied together to create something new. So for example, we've talked about the factors of 12. Let's say I have 12 here. Factors of 12 is 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. See? We have 2 factors, or 2 terms, which is 3 and 4, that multiply together to create our new expression, which is 12. Okay? So we're going to review some double distribution. Now, we did this in Unit 1, and we've done it a little bit already, so let's go ahead and double distribute. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to take x times x, so I have x squared, not 2x, okay? X times x is x times itself twice, so it's x squared. X times positive 5 is plus 5x, and then I have negative 3 times x, which is negative 3x, negative 3 times 5, which is negative 15. Okay, do I have any like terms? I do. I have plus 5x and minus 3x, so it's going to be x squared plus 2x minus 15. Okay, so we start, I'm so sorry, my dog is barking in the background. All right, so I started off with, let's see, look at what we had in the parentheses. So how many things are in each of those parentheses? There's 2 terms in each parentheses, so I started off with 2 binomials, okay? I started off with 2 binomials here, and after I double distributed and everything, and I got it simplified in that green form, I have 3 terms, which is 1 trinomial. Okay, so I've been starting at 2 binomials and getting into 1 trinomial. Okay, that's what we've been doing since Unit 1. Now, this lesson, we're going to go backwards. We're going from trinomial back into those 2 binomials. So, let's talk about where that first term came from. Okay, so let's talk about our first term. Let's look at the trinomial there. Our first term here is x squared. Where did it come from? What did we do to get x squared? Well, I multiplied, let's choose a different color. I multiplied the first terms in each parentheses. Do you see that? X times x, that's how I got the x squared. So Where did that come from? It's the product of the first two terms in the parentheses. Whoops. Okay, so the first two terms there, we have x and x. Now, what's the last term in our trinomial? Our last term here is negative 15. And let's talk about where the negative 15 came from. What did I multiply to get negative 15? I multiplied the negative 3 and the positive 5. So then I multiplied the last two terms of our trinomial there. Binomials. So this is a product of the last two terms in the parentheses. Okay, now I have a star next to this last one because this is probably the most important one, and the reason why the reason why we have this lesson here. We want to know, where did that middle term come from? This 2x here, where did that come from? So I'm going to put this in a different color because it is different. Okay, it's not as obvious where it came from. Let's look at back. Let's go one step backwards, right? We have our triangle. Let's go one step back. Where did that 2x come from? Well, I know that I took this 5x and I combined it with this negative 3x and got the plus 2x. Okay, I got something positive from it. So I could combine the last two. Then where did the 5x and the negative 3x come from? Well, that's from double distributing up top. So it's a combination of all of those things that gave me that 2x. So it wasn't as easy to find. The first and last term are easy, but that middle term is the one that we have to figure out. So this is a combination of all four terms. Okay. So we took a combination of our two binomials there to get our 2x. So we didn't just pop out the 2x from anywhere. We had to get it somehow. So let's do an example really quick. If I have x minus 2 times x plus 6, what would my first term be? Well, my first term here would be x squared. Okay, because I take the first two terms and multiply it. My last term would be whatever my last two terms are, which is negative 12. Okay, this is the part that I don't know. The middle term is the one that's kind of tricky to find. I know these notes seem kind of long, and you're like, Miss Bowie, why are you still talking? Because it's very important where you understand where this comes from, because when we move on, you're going to be like, why are we doing this? And I'll be like, well, this is why, because we don't know how to get the middle term. So that part's tricky because you have to do the negative 2 times x and then the 6 times x. So there's extra steps to find that middle term there. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and just copy this down really quick somewhere. I'm just copying the example that we just did above so that I can reference it later. I just don't want to have to scroll all the way up. So just give me 1 second to write all this down again. You already have this written, so you don't have to write it again. But I'm going to write it again so I can reference back to it. Okay. This is very important. I put a star next to it. I capitalized everything. I underlined it. This part is important. When you are factoring anytime, you always check for a GCF first. Always. GCF, what's that stand for? That stands for greatest common factor. So the greatest factor that can be factored out of every single term. Okay? So let's go ahead and begin factoring. You need to get really good at this skill because you're going to be doing this for forever in geometry and algebra 2 and so on. So you're going to be using factoring forever. Okay? So here I have 3 terms, a trinomial. I always check for a GCF first. Okay? Do I have one? The most I could factor out is a 1, and factoring out a 1 doesn't do anything, so I don't have a GCF really here. So now let's talk about this. We're starting at this step, basically. We're starting at a trinomial step, and we're going backwards, okay? We're undoing our double distribution. So I need to go from this step to this step, okay? Now, what's the difference between those two steps? The difference is that this middle term is now split up into 2 different guys. The x squared stayed the same, and the negative 15 stayed the same. So I know for a fact that I'm going to have x squared, I'm going to have plus 6 here. But I don't know what those 2 middle terms are going to be yet. okay? And you're probably thinking like, well, I could have a million combinations for those two. Not quite, because it does have to follow some procedures and some rules. So we want to go from the trinomial back into the previous step, which is breaking it up into two parts. So in order to find how I'm going to split this guy up into two different parts, I'm going to draw out a little X here. So go ahead and draw yourself an X right there. Large enough, not too large, but large enough for you to be able to write numbers in there. Okay, so this is called the AC method. Okay, now let's go ahead and identify our A, B, and our C. So our C here is our 6. It's the last number. Okay, our B is our 5. And what's our A here? Our A is not x squared. Remember, A, B, and C are numbers. So it's the number in front of x squared, which is 1. Okay? These notes are called factoring when A is 1. So for all of these problems, your A should be a 1. Okay? It's called the AC method because you're going to multiply your A and your C together. So what's 1 times 6? 6. Okay. That number, whatever that product is going to go in this top one. Okay? You're going to take A times C. And then go ahead and draw a multiplication sign on top of that. Okay? Again, let's go back to the reason why are we doing this? The reason why we're doing this thing here, the whole AC method, is because we're trying to figure out how do I split up that middle term back into two different terms, okay? So I know that that middle term has to be split up, and whatever I split it up to has to add back to that single middle term. So that 5x in the middle is important. So that 5, I need to add to 5. So I'm going to put a plus sign underneath. Okay? I'm going really slow because it's not always easy the very first time we're learning this. Okay, after that, I know, so I put a times sign and a plus sign because I need two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 5, okay? So let's look at our factors for 6. We want it to multiply to 6. So what are factors of 6? Positive 6. We have 1 times 6, and we have 2 times 3, okay? Now, are those all the numbers that multiply to make to positive 6? We're actually missing some. Well, negative 1 times negative 6, does that not also give me positive 6? Yeah. Negative 2 times negative 3 also gives me positive 6. So now that I have all of my factors of 6, all of these things multiply to 6, I need to figure out which one of these adds to 5. So looking at all these numbers, I'm like, okay, well, 2 plus 3 gives me 5. So I'm going to write that number over here. I'm going to write a 2 and a 3 here. If you want to write the 3 first, go ahead. It doesn't change anything. If you want to put 3, then 2, doesn't matter. Now again, why am I doing this? I need to split up this 5 in the middle, right? I'm undoing double distribution. I need to split that guy up. The 2 and the 3 are telling me what I'm going to split it up into. So, okay. Again, this stayed the same from the beginning. This stayed the same from the beginning, so those don't change. But I'm splitting the 5x up, so I'm going to have plus 2x and plus 3x. Okay? Why is it plus 3x and plus 2x? Again, that x is telling me what I'm splitting it up to. This is a positive 2, that's a positive 3. So when I put the x's there, when I put these here, they're both positive. And you're like, well, how do I know I did this right? Well, 2 times 3 gives me 6. Does 2x plus 3x give me 5x? Yeah. 2 apples plus 3 apples is 5 apples, so that's correct. Once you get to this step, then you look at it, you're like, well, how many terms do I have? I have 4 terms. Could I do factor by grouping? Yeah. So you're basically going to go back to the lesson that we did yesterday or the day before. You look at your first 2 terms and then you look at your last 2 terms. You're grouping them. So we have 2 terms here, so let's have a division bar. What's the largest factor they both have? That's going to be x. So what do I do with that GCF? I take that x out, put it outside the parentheses, and what I have left over is x plus 2. Okay. Next part, GCF here is going to be positive 3. It's going to be out here, plus 3. And then I have x plus 2. Always want to check to see if your parentheses match. They do. So my parentheses are going to be x plus 3 and x plus 2. And those are my 2 factors. I undid double distribution. See how I have 2 factors here that are both binomials? We went backwards. So that's basically like we started here at the trinomial step. We split them up. And then after we split them up and did factor by grouping, we got this step. And that's what we want because we're going backwards. We're undoing everything. Okay? Now, how could I check? Well, let's check really quick. Let's do double distribution. Let's distribute it back in and see if we get the same thing we started with. X times x is x squared. X times 2 is positive 2x. 3 times x is plus 3x. Positive 3 times 2 is plus 6. I have like terms here. Sorry, I'm going to use a different color. Let's do pink. That's going to be x squared plus 5x plus 6. Is that what I started with? Yeah. So I did it correctly. Okay? I went really slow. I know you were like, wow, that took like forever to do one problem. But really, once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. So we're going to go ahead and start number 2. Okay? First thing you always check for, GCF. Do I have one? I do not. Okay? So that means you can go on. You can do your little, split your middle term. So draw my little x here. Let's use a red. Doesn't really matter what color I use, but I just wanted to use a different color. Okay. Now, AC method. So 1 times negative 12 is negative 12. That goes on top. I want it to multiply to negative 12. And I want it to add to what? What's the number in front of my x here? Technically a negative 1. So we want it to add to negative 1. Okay? So we want it to multiply to negative 12. So let's list our factors for negative 12. What could possibly give us a negative 12? Well, I could have negative 1 times 12. I could have 1 times negative 12. I could have negative 2 times 6. 2 times negative 6. Negative 3 times 4. And then 3 times negative 4. Okay? So these are all the factors that multiply and make negative 12. Remember, you do have to consider negatives in this case because sometimes that helps us get our factors here. All right, so let's look. Which one of these numbers, so all of these are multiplied to negative 12. So we got this part checked off. We don't really need to look at that anymore. Now we need to think about that negative 1 down there. We need two numbers that add to make negative 1 out of all of these pairs. Okay, our pair here that's going to add to negative 1 is going to be that last one, which is 3 and negative 4. So we have 3 and negative 4. Okay, if you want to put negative 4 first, it does not matter. You will end up with the same thing, I promise. Okay. So, again, what's the point of doing all that? We're doing all of this to split up this middle guy right here. We want to split that guy up. So, x squared stays the same. X squared stays the same, and the negative 12 stays the same, right? We're just splitting that middle guy up so that we can do factor by grouping. So, we have positive 3x and negative 4x. And then you can check, does this add to make negative 1? Yeah. And now that I have 4 terms, I can go ahead and factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at my first 2 terms. I have, the most I have is x. So I factor out an x, and I have x plus 3 remaining on the inside. And then on the second part, what is my GCF? Remember that first term's negative, so we need to factor out a negative 4. Not just a 4, but a negative 4. And then we have x plus 3. My parentheses indeed match, so we are good there. We have x minus 4 times x plus 3. Okay. So those are our 2 factors. Again, you can double distribute and you'll get what you got at the beginning. Okay? Not too bad as soon as we start getting the hang of things. All right. So, number 3. Check for GCF. I don't have one, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. I've got my little x there. I want it to multiply to positive 10, and I want it to add to negative 11. Your middle term is always going to go on the bottom if that helps you with that. Now I want it to multiply to positive 10. So let's list the factors for positive 10. That's 1 times 10, 2 times 5. Anything else? What about negative 2 times negative 5? Doesn't that give me positive 10? And we also have negative 10 and negative 1. Okay, that also gives me positive 10. Again, you want to consider negatives because 1 plus 10 isn't going to give me a negative 11, and 2 plus 5 isn't going to give me negative 11. So you always want to consider what is going to be, you always have to consider your negatives in this. So The two numbers that are going to add to negative 11 are the last two, negative 10 and negative 1. Okay, so m squared is going to stay the same, and 10 is going to stay the same. We're splitting up that middle guy. We're splitting him up into two terms, which is negative 10m minus 1m, and then plus 10. Okay? That's all we're doing. We're basically splitting this guy up. Okay? Moving on, just factor by grouping. So, divide both of these guys by m. We have m minus 10. And we divide these guys by negative 1. Whoops, I didn't write the m there. So we have negative 1, so we have m minus 10. My parentheses match, so we are good there. We have m minus 1 times m minus 10. And there we have it. We have that now. Okay, that one wasn't too bad. You want to get the hang of it. It gets better. Next, we need to do number 4. So, always check for a what at the beginning? GCF. So, GCF here, do I have one? I actually do have one. So, my GCF here is actually a 3. I can factor out this 3. Okay, so I'll have 3x squared minus 5x minus 6. So, I'm going to do my little x with the stuff I have inside the parentheses. So for now, I'm just going to pretend that 3 isn't there, and I'll bring it back in later. So we're not going to worry about him. So just pretend he isn't there over there. Okay. Whoops. All right, so I want it to multiply to negative 6, and I want it to add to negative 5. So let's list the terms, or list the factors for negative 6. It's going to be negative 2 times 3. That's going to be 2 times negative 3. Be negative 1 times 6, and then 1 times negative 6. So these are all the things that multiply to make negative 6. Now you want to look for which one of these is going to get me negative 5. Well, the last one. 1 plus negative 6 is going to give me negative 5. So I have 1 and negative 6 here. Okay, so again, what's the point of doing all this? We're trying to split up negative 5x. Okay. So I'm going to leave the 3 out there for now. I'm going to pretend like he's not there. I'm going to worry about him later. So I have x squared plus 1x minus 6x minus 6. Again, if you want to put the negative 6x in the front, it doesn't matter. Okay? Once I'm at this step, I'm going to do factor by grouping. So the most I can factor out is an x here, and the most I can factor out over here is a negative 6. Again, I'm going to leave that 3 out there. So when I factor, I take out that x. What I have left in the parentheses is x plus 1. Over here, I factored out a negative 6, and then I have x plus 1 again. So my parentheses do match. And then when you rewrite all of this, you're going to stick that 3 on the outside. So it's still going to be multiplied to the rest. But your first parentheses will be x minus 6, and your second one's x plus 1. Okay? Don't forget that this x minus 6 is here now. Okay, that's all we're doing there. All right. That's our next one. If you wanted to check yourself, you double distribute, and then you distribute the 3 back in. Okay? Again, this whole process is to basically undo double distribution. So it's way easy to double distribute. This part is the worst, is harder. Definitely going backwards. All right, number 5. Always check for a GCF first. Do I have a GCF here? I do. That's going to be 5x squared, 5x squared. So that's going to go on the outside of my parentheses. Okay. And then 5 divided by 5 is 1. X cubed divided by x squared is x. And then I have negative 6, and then the x squareds cancel there. Okay. Inside of my parentheses, do I still have a trinomial? No. I only have a binomial now. See how over here when we factored out that 3, we still had 3 terms in the inside? Since I only have 2 terms here, I can't really do much else, so I'm actually done with this problem. It's all done. You can't factor any further because it's as much as it can go. All right, number 6. Okay, look for a GCF. Do I have one? I do. I can factor out an x. Okay, so I factor out that x, and I have left x squared minus 14x minus 120. All right, so Negative 120 is pretty big, right? So let's make our little x here. Remember, we're going to disregard that x on the outside for now. We have to multiply to negative 120, and it needs to add to negative 14, okay? Now, negative 120 has a lot of factors. So I'm going to show you that little calculator trick again. I know it's probably not our favorite thing to do, but it will help with this problem since it's so big. All right, so we have y. So in your calculator, if you want to write down the steps first, you're going to do, in your y1, you're going to do number over x. And then your y2, you're going to have the number over x plus x, okay? Now, in this case, what number are we trying to find the factors for? We're trying to find the factors of negative 120. So in your calculator, you're going to have y1 be negative 120 over x. Now, this is your y equals screen, if you haven't caught on to that. So the y2 would be, in parentheses, negative 120 over x plus x, okay? Now, the reason why we're doing that second part is because we're trying to find the factors and making sure it goes even. So you're going to type that into your calculator, and once you're done, you're going to hit second graph. Okay. You're going to hit second graph on that. Now, you should see something when you hit second graph. You should see an x, a y1, and a y squared. So you should see, like, if you're using the calculators in class, we should have a black, blue, and then red. Now, what is the number that we're trying to get our factors to add to? Okay, factors of negative 120. What are we trying to get it to add to? We're trying to get it to add to negative 14. We want it to add to this number here, okay? We want it to add to negative 14. So, you're going to scroll down and look at your x and y1. You need to figure out the pair that adds up to negative 14. So, in your y2 column, that third column, you want to look for a negative 14, and then you want to look over to the left and be like, okay, which numbers is adding to negative 14? Depending on your calculator, sometimes it's different. You should get 6 and negative 20, or negative 20 and 6. So it's possible you're getting either of those, but those will add to negative 14. Okay, so it's giving you those factors. So it's doing it for us. So we know it's going to be negative 20 and 6 for our factors here. So, in my parentheses, again, keep that x out there. We're not going to mess with them yet. We have x squared, and remember, we're splitting up the negative 14x, so we have negative 20x plus 6x minus 120. And then from here, we're going to do factor by grouping, so keep the x out there. So we have x, because we can divide out an x here. We have x, and we have x minus 20. And then we can divide a 6 on both of these. So we have plus 6, x minus 20. Those match. And then we end up with the x on the outside. We have x plus 6 and x minus 20. Okay. Again, I know these notes are pretty long, but it's really important that you practice this. You're going to use this for the rest of your math life, okay? Doesn't matter where you stop, you're going to use it until you're done with math. All right, last problem. Also, if you're having trouble with the calculator part, please come in and ask me for help. I will go ahead and I will definitely help you with that. Again, check for a GCF. I don't have one, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my little x here. So I have 322 that I want it to multiply to, and I want it to add to negative 37. Okay, so I am not going to do that. I'm not going to list all the factors of 322, but I am going to put that in the calculator. So 322 divided by x, and then in your y2, you're going to do 322 divided by x plus x. And then you're going to do second graph, you're going to look at your list here. Okay, and I actually need to get my calculator out so I can do that. So we have 322 divided by x, and then we have 322 divided by x plus x. Oh, I typed something in wrong. All right, and then you're going to hit second graph to see that list. Now you want it to add to negative 37. Where is my Apple Pen? I have lost it. No, okay, there it is. So you want it to add to negative 37, so we're looking for that in the y2 column. We want it to be in this column here. Pop the negative 37. So I think, yep, I got it. All right, so our two numbers are going to be negative 14 and negative 23. Those two numbers will add to negative 37. So those are our magic numbers there. They're not really magic, but it's kind of cool that our calculator can help us out with this one. So again, y squared will stay the same, and then you have negative 14x minus 23x plus 322. Okay, again, you're going to do factor by grouping, so you can factor out an x from the first group. We have x, and then inside we have x minus 14. And then from here, it looks like 23 will go into 322. So we can take out a negative 23 from both of these. So we'll have negative 23 on the outside, and we have x minus 14. So our parentheses do match. So our factors are x minus 23 and then x minus 14. If I wanted to double distribute, I would get the same thing I started with. So these are the notes for factoring when a is 1. Now, factoring when a is not 1, one extra step, but same process. So you will get that extra practice. Again, if you're struggling with this, please let me know.